Hi guys, my name's John and I'm a qualified veterinarian and biologist. And today we're talking about career paths into working in wildlife veterinary pathology. As usual, a member of the profession that we're talking about joins me and I'll be asking her questions about her career and how it developed. So what can you expect in the next half hour? This is not a natural history documentary. Instead, what we'll present is a possible career path if you want to work in wildlife veterinary pathology. It's an interview in which I ask the questions I wish I'd asked 35 years ago when starting my wildlife career. And before we go any further, I would like to say thank you to my subscribers. Without you, there would be no channel. Working as a wildlife veterinary pathologist and living the wild life looks like this. It's a barely recognised fact that if you have a degree in veterinary medicine, then you have any area of the wildlife industry in the palm of your hand. But getting that degree in the USA is the hardest thing there is because you have to get an undergraduate degree first. Natalie, how would you describe wildlife veterinary pathology today? And what jobs does this situation create?
I find it's an ever-evolving portion of veterinary medicine at this point. I've been wanting to be a vet since I was a kid, and I feel like everyone says that there's no jobs in wildlife, and I feel like that's not the most accurate. The jobs aren't necessarily plentiful, that being said, but I've seen the wildlife field expand quite a bit into many sectors that I feel like have not existed before. And especially in the sector that I'm in now, which we'll get into shortly, like I don't think anyone really explained that there are so many avenues within veterinary medicine within wildlife that are not just necessarily treating animals, but there's so much research involved that you can also do as a veterinarian, as well as subspecialize, and even just the manner of which you can get involved is so broad. I think a lot of people really try to pin it down to this one thing of like you're only working with wildlife, trying to treat them to get healthy to go get released in a rehab setting, versus there's so much involved that you can do. And I feel like the grand scheme of things, it's honestly still evolving, where I'm not even sure if what I'm saying is even the most accurate in terms of what options are and even the next couple of years. So it's just a ever expanding field, and I feel like it's a field that requires a lot of creativity to get involved in.
What do you do?
I am a veterinary pathologist who is looking to specialize in zoo and wildlife pathology. And in the grant, and what that really means is just I am doing autopsies on animals to figure out why they died. And that's a very broad field itself, but I am subspecializing right now in zoo and wildlife medicine for hopefully for the rest of my career as well.
Do you do it for personal satisfaction, professional recognition, or the money?
There's no money. Vet med, if you're going into vet med for the money, go into human medicine. If you want to go to wildlife, anything, you definitely no. But definitely for the personal satisfaction, that I went into veterinary medicine to work basically community based. I didn't realize the type of veterinarian I would become when I left vet school, but the no, I went to veterinary medicine for the more community aspect because I wanted to be a farm veterinarian. I liked population medicine and the concept of One Health with the environmental health, human health, and animal health all being combined. And then that actually morphed once I entered veterinary school and was interested in pathology, realizing, oh, those concepts are actually very important in pathology because they focus so much on the community base when it comes to the food animal sector as well as the wildlife sector. And since then, it's also for me pushed me in that direction. So definitely for the personal satisfaction. Would I like professional recognition eventually? Yes, but I'm also very early career, so we'll get to that point. That's hope maybe. If not, just as long as I get to try to solve the puzzles, that's all I care about.
With the idea that to be a certain professional, what you have to do is copy the career trajectory of somebody who's already doing that job. How did your career develop?
I knew I wanted to go to veterinary school, and I was one of those kids that knew they wanted to go into veterinary school relatively early. I was that kid at 10 years old who I actually read James Hurriet's All Creatures Great and Small when I was like 14. So I I have the whole collection as well. It's up on my bookshelf, but the I that's I knew I liked animals. I knew I wanted to work with animals, and James Hurriet helped me go in the direction of veterinary medicine. And I was an animal science major in my undergraduate degree, because in the US we still have to get undergraduates before going into veterinary school, unfortunately, instead of going straight in. Um, so many years. I went to undergrad, did my bachelor's of science in animal science, and I was fortunate enough to go right into veterinary school from there. And I actually went up to Canada. I went to the Atlantic Veterinary College at the University of Prince Edward Island. And that's where I got exposed to pathology. When you were in vet school, you get exposed to pathology in your first couple of years usually, because even if you don't become a pathologist, many veterinarians have to get involved with pathology in their clinical career at some point, especially if you're in the farm animal sector. And from there, if you want to become a pathologist and or specialize in anything in veterinary medicine, you have to go on to do a residency. So I did a 3-year anatomic pathology residency at the University of Connecticut. And thankfully, because of that specialty, I don't have to do an internship because there's no point in doing an internship on the living if you're only working with the dead. So do not push yourself through an internship unless you really have to. Um, so yeah, I went on to a 3-year pathology residency. I took uh, my board examination at the end to become a diplomate of the American College of Veterinary Pathologists. Very expensive exam, very hard, very tiring, but that's basically the trajectory that you have to take in order to become a veterinarian and then a pathologist. Because I've gotten that question actually a few times recently of could you be a pathologist without becoming a veterinarian? It used to be, I think you could get a PhD, but in reality, it's you don't get the same training and that you would get if you became a veterinarian to then go into pathology. And I don't know of anyone that would hire you based on just to go doing a PhD because you want to learn all the medicine, you want to learn all the nuances that it goes behind the pathology, and I don't think you get that with a PhD versus a 4 years of vet school and a 3-year residency.
What skills do you need to be a wildlife veterinary pathologist?
I came out of a class of 68 people, and three of us went on to pathology residencies, which is considered high. Like it's not necessarily the thing that people reach for when they're going for the veterinary career, and that's fine. Um, so you have to be a little bit of that curious mind, want to solve the puzzle, a bit of a strong stomach too, especially when you go into the wildlife sector. You're doing autopsies on animals, there's gonna be smells to be had. I swear every time I saw a pig in my residency, I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to go for a shower immediately because that smell is going to permeate on me all day. And if you do anything marine mammal, you are going to be stinking like a fish to high heaven. Um, so strong stomach, not ultra sensitive nose, but in terms of overall skills, it's just and these are skills that develop over time. It's learning to see patterns and seeing changes. And that's the things they train you on is you're trained on what is normal and then you take that and you try to compare it to what you're seeing and as well as be very good with the microscope because a lot of people think majority of my job is actually the actual prosection or the cutting. In reality, a lot of my job is at the microscope looking at tissues on the microscopic level. So you have to have the ability to be able to go from the like kind of hardworking lab work to sitting at the computer and having very detailed notes, which again, we're all trained on taking detailed notes because everything's a medical record and you want to make sure everything is up to snuff, basically. But in terms of pathology, it's that getting that pattern recognition. It's starting to um, see the finest of little details, whether it's on the necropsy table or at the microscope, and just have that innate curiosity too. When you go into wildlife pathology medicine, uh, and this is both for wildlife and zoo realm, there's so many things that are unknown that there's going to be a lot of times where your skill set is going to be doing that literature search and calling everyone you know because you're like, this thing is weird. I've never seen this. I can't find anything written about it. I need to go phone a friend. And it's the that's the humbling aspect, I would say. So I would say the being curious to solve the puzzle, having that innate want to go find the answer, and being humble enough to know when you definitely have hit the end of your road and willing to reach out to your colleagues. So those are like the big skills. And those are very broad. It's very I'm gonna say it. Those are very basic answers for myself. But the I find if you have that drive for curiosity, then you'll be sound as a pathologist as long as your nose is good, your eyes are good, and your hands are good.
How can new graduates acquire these skills?
Honestly, it's very hard at that level to get experience, at least in the States, because there's such the division between the undergraduate setting and then the veterinary school setting. I always tell people if and and mind you, I come from the program I went to for my residency is very different. I didn't go to a program that had a veterinary school. University of Connecticut has a very strong pre-veterinary program across different departments. But they happen to have the state diagnostic lab for veterinary disease on the campus. So I was working strictly with undergrads who were learning skills with me while they're being my necropsy assistants. So I find if you are a student that has access to a lab, that's honestly your best bet is getting those skills through taking those harder courses. Because in reality, it's a lot of priming your brain with those difficult classes. And it's all in all, it's all problem solving. And it is having the creativity for that problem solving. And when it comes to getting experience, take those harder classes. Take those classes. I feel like I ran into this a lot with some of my students. I had some students who didn't have access to certain classes, or they were told to go for this major because it was easier than taking that major. And I'm like, learn to become this. Do not worry about what's easier. Because when you're hitting a dead road, you're going to want to have those program skills to problem solve. And this is someone who also does not necessarily want to work harder than she necessarily needs to. I'm always saying work smarter, not harder, but there are times where when you push yourself with those more difficult classes, that can be very helpful for you with those problem solving skills. And then if you happen to be near a university that has access to a diagnostic lab, see if you can do an internship or an externship. Some of those programs do offer summer positions for students either at their facility or outside their facility. So it's really the hands-on experience is really helpful to just get that handful, especially if it's a training program that has residents like me, because many of us are very eager to teach. My bread and butter when it comes to teaching is the hands-on approach. When I have a little ADHD brain who's very visual learner, I need to be able to have something in front of me to also teach people how to do these things. And the students that I worked with have all gone on to veterinary school or have gone on to graduate programs because of that experience. And they had a leg up already because they were in my lab. And I find that if you, it's a, and again, about getting creative. It's willing to go outside your boundaries as well. I find so there are some kids that are so homebody based. I'm like, go out, expand your experience because everyone has clinical veterinary experience. Not everyone has experience in a veterinary diagnostic lab. And it could be doing necropsies with me, or it's learning molecular techniques to do PCRs and ELISAs and serology. All those are getting your hands-on experience, and those lab techniques courses are so helpful.
To be a veterinary pathologist, do you need a degree?
For pathology, you do, and you definitely need to go to vet school to do it first. There's plenty of people. Let me back up. If you want to be a veterinarian because you like the medicine side of things, then yes. And even if you don't like the medicine side of things and want to be in wildlife, a lot of times most of these jobs do require some kind of bachelor's degree with experiential learning. And that's unfortunately the thing that you cannot avoid. Everyone I work with has some bachelor's degree, and some people even have masters. And then if you're at my level, of course, you have a doctorate of veterinary medicine. So unfortunately, in wildlife, maybe at the beginning, you might be able to get by, but if you ever want to move up in the field, you will always need a degree of some sort. And the more in leadership, and I'm even running into those roadblocks myself, where I have colleagues of mine, mentors of mine, who also have PhDs on top of the fact they did vet school and a pathology residency and then got the PhD. So there's always a ladder, and you really have to be very insightful of the type of work you want to do to figure out at what level you need to be. If you want to go to veterinary school, yes, those prereqs are daunting. Everyone will tell you that, but the journey is worth it if it's really what you want to do. And they were hard for me. I barely got into vet school because of those courses, but I pushed through and I got it. And same thing, vet school was really hard, but I pushed through and I got a residency, and here I am. So if it's worth the fight, don't give up. Do not let that organic chemistry class uh take you out because everyone's got to do it. Just find your support system and get a good tutor.
Now, for somebody who's thinking of writing a project and thinking of a suitable theme or subject, what issues would you like to see addressed in wildlife veterinary pathology over the next 5 years?
There are definitely more wildlife pathologists than there were in the past. The field, like we said at the beginning, the field is expanding in the wildlife sector overall. And then within the veterinary pathology field, the wildlife has really expanded with organizations like the center I am at with the National Wildlife Health Center, the as well as down at University of Georgia, they have the Southeastern Wildlife Disease Cooperative that has a great deal of work. I find that the biggest things is actually just the conglomeration of information and the sharing of information can be very difficult, as well as the jobs are still very limited, even though a wildlife pathologist could really be useful in many sectors. Unfortunately, there are states who want to hire pathologists, but they don't actually hire pathologists. It'll be listed as pathologist, but then the minimum requirements is just a master's degree. I'm like, so you're looking for a biologist who can do necropsies. Because if you really want to do pathology properly, you need someone like myself who is trained to do everything from doing the autopsy to doing the microscope work and knowing what tests to run. Because I could teach many people to do the cutting. I have had met many a skilled technician, and the technician I work with at the center, she is fantastic. She has abundant wildlife experience as well. And I can trust her to do what I need, to tag team if we have more than one animal in one day. Be like, hey, we have three geese. Can you cut open one of them while I'm cutting open this one? But she's not going to do the microscope work. She does not have that education skill set. She has many skills, but that's just not one. So I find that there needs to be more funding to actually hire professionals in these sectors so we have accurate data, and we need a more centric data collection scenario. Because the lack of sharing information can be really daunting. The publications could be behind paywalls, or the amount of times I've run into where I'm talking to someone and they mention something, I'm like, where'd you find that information? They're like, oh, it's anecdotal. I'm like, why didn't you publish this? So there's a lot of anecdotal information doesn't have not time or funding to be published. There's not enough crosstalk between organizations, and there's just not enough of us dispersed throughout the country. And it's where in very localized areas where people develop these programs that have a lot of funding. And some people just are a little afraid to tackle wildlife pathology because not everyone is a specialist in wildlife pathology. I learn everything. I had to learn all the domestic animals because the core of my training was in horses, cows, dogs, cats, goats, sheep, pigs, chickens. But I happened to be at a program that had a lot of wildlife, so I was exposed to a lot of wildlife and a lot of zoo animals, and I wasn't afraid to touch it. I've met a lot of older pathologists who are afraid to touch anything that is scales and feathers. If they're not willing to touch it, then they were not helpful because they weren't willing to push through. And but I've been exposed to so many things and I've learned I'm like, oh, there is a knowledge gap because there's so few people who are willing to take those risks with those special species. And even the invertebrate realm too, as more people have invertebrates in collections or as pets, there's a select few people who even know knowledge about that. So there's massive knowledge gaps as well as a lack of crosstalk and lack of resources.
And for somebody entering the profession in the next 5 years, what jobs might that situation create?
Honestly, pathologists can work in so many different sectors. There's government jobs that is for the state, federal jobs, academia at a veterinary school, or just in private diagnostic labs. If more companies, universities, and government agencies were willing to tackle these problems, they would open up so many jobs. And that's also why I like being a pathologist, is that I do have an option on relatively of what kind of job I want to work in the grand scheme of things. It's not necessarily on the federal, state government side and academia side, it can be a little tricky depending upon the year. But in a perfect world, this would expand so many more positions, not just in the pathology sector, but in all sectors. Because the biggest thing with wildlife medicine is funding. And in perfect world, if every state and university had funding, especially for the veterinary schools, we would have more options for people to pursue wildlife and zoo medicine.
And again, for somebody trying to find their niche in wildlife veterinary pathology, where do our knowledge gaps lie in it?
Uh, there's everything is so, oh, that's such a hard question to be honest. I was looking at your questions ahead of time and I was trying to think. Knowledge gaps, and maybe this is more focused on zoo rather than strictly wildlife. And actually, no, it is also can apply to wildlife. There's so much lack of knowledge in the invertebrate sector. So many people like myself, we're mainly trained on mammals. Some of us are trained on birds. If you're really lucky, fish. I got a lot of fish experience. But then once you get into when an animal lacks a backbone, everyone gets nervous. And I find the knowledge gaps are usually in that, but also because not everyone, again, this sometimes a lack of crosstalk. Uh, there's also so much uncertainty of what diseases are going to spill over. Like I find that the virology has really expanded in the last like decade or two, but there's still so much of, oh, we don't know what this is going to do to us actually if this pops in from wildlife to animals, wildlife to humans or domestic animals. So knowledge gaps usually involve like what kind of diseases can arise and how can it present in different animals as animals interact more, there's a lot more disease fragmentation. But then in terms of like direct species too, I find there's a lot of knowledge gaps when you get into the lower rung animals, I'll put them. Not everyone cares about them as much because people think they lack feelings, which I am not going to anthropomorphize today. But the if it's not a charismatic species, they don't get as much uh credit or knowledge acquired from them per se.
Again, for somebody thinking of a project they can do, can you suggest a research project for an undergraduate veterinary student?
I have a hard time really suggesting projects to people only because I always tell people to go with what is interesting to you. But oh my God, there's so many things. Uh, I could bounce off of something from my residency. I'm in the process of writing a manuscript. We're in editing right now. I was the black bear magnet during my residency, and it was I had three bears during my residency that had a neurologic condition called GM1 gangliosidosis, which is an autosomal recessive disease that is basically fatal by the time they're juvenile. And if we going back to biology, for everyone who can't remember, lysosomes, they're supposed to break stuff down, but if you lack certain enzymes or proteins, things accumulate and things go haywire. That's what happened in these three bears. And there was only that condition is well described in humans and domestic animals, but not in wildlife whatsoever. There was one other paper about a decade prior to my first case. No, actually, not even that far. It was published 5 years before my first case, but the cases spanned from the 90s to like 2010. Um, and ours was the first cases in Connecticut. What we don't know is what this will entail for population dynamics. So if a student's looking for something interesting that can be very broad-based, um, potential genetic diseases in very isolated populations, I think is going to be very understudied. I think it's overall very understudied in wildlife. And it's not necessarily the sexiest thing because everyone wants to be, all the infectious diseases and everything. I think people very underestimate the potentially genetic heritable diseases that can acquire and what can accumulate in a population that's secluded. No one in New England has done a study yet on how broad that gene goes because it's an autosomal recessive gene. There's plenty of carriers because my three bears, we found out through after I got the first one, I was writing the paper on the first one, second one rolled up, found the same location as the first one. I'm like, what are the chances they're related? Full brothers for those first two bears, and the third one was a half sister of the first two. And we're like, oh no. So we have multiple carriers, and we don't know if it's multiple males, multiple females. We don't know what this means for the genetics of the population overall. So if a student's going to look for anything, try to find something related to genetics in a population and potential genetic diseases because it might be very well understudied. I remember presenting that poster at a conference at the end of my residency. Of course, it's been like 3 years since I finished residency, and I'm only just trying to get it published this year because, well, time and resources. But I had so many people come up to my poster looking in awe and fear because they were like, "Oh no, that's bad." And I'm like, "Yeah, it's not great." But it's there's so many. Find something you're interested in, but when in doubt, go for the stuff that is find a PI who has been wanting to work on a project forever because it's probably something that no one really thinks to look at.
Are there any practices or protocols used by peers that you would like to see changed?
As technology and we have many more diagnostic tools available, there's some pathologists that I was taught by who were I'm just gonna call them old school, where everything was diagnosed with pathology, and they were trained prior to PCR being developed. But as time has gone on, we don't just have the standard diagnostic tools as a pathologist where you do the necropsy, look at the microscope. We have so many more staining techniques to highlight things like bacteria, parasites, the like in tissues. We have immunohistochemistry to better describe tumors and identify tumors, as well as even you can use immunohistochemistry to identify diseases, or infectious agents, I should say, as well as now we have PCR techniques, serology, so many more things than I think previous pathologists are used to using. And some people are very comfortable making diagnoses based on the histology, which is what we do when we look at the microscope. That's histology. But as someone, especially myself, who is still learning, if I have a suspicion of something and it could really make or break a diagnosis, or in the world of wildlife, when you're dealing a lot with infectious diseases, use those tools to make sure that you are accurately diagnosing this problem. Because if you miss an infectious disease because you didn't have that test run, we could have a lot more problems. I had a case of an eagle recently where I was definitely leaning towards that the major cause of death was likely lead toxicosis. It's a very common problem we have in raptors in this day and age. It had a lot of the histologic signs under the microscope that it was, but I didn't have the lead levels back yet. And sometimes those diseases can that presentation can overlap with West Nile virus. And as someone who has dealt a lot with West Nile virus, when I was at the University of Connecticut, I wasn't taking a risk. I was like, I'm just gonna have that PCR run so I can sleep tonight. Because if I didn't diagnose that, we could have missed the opportunity to make sure that in the grand scheme of disease surveillance, West Nile virus wasn't popping up on the West Coast in March. Uh, because I think, especially in the wildlife sector, people forget. I'm like, a lot of this has to do with disease surveillance, not just finding the diagnosis. And you want to make sure that if there is any potential infectious agent that is off in the time of year, any different species, um, or an unusual presentation in a familiarly described species, that you want to rule it out. So I find that sometimes when certain pathologists have an answer, they'll stop what they're doing and be like, well, that's it. And forget that we have to be careful because there could be more than one thing that took this animal out. And if you don't rule out some of the bigger players, we could have a bigger problem with more animals passing, and we missed it when the first one arrived.
What conferences should people be looking to attend in wildlife veterinary pathology?
The Wildlife Disease Association conference is an excellent one. Um, that is many conferences you go to, it's going to be one group of people. It's going to be a lot of your peers in the same career, which is great because again, that collaborative efforts, crosstalk, that's where most crosstalk is going to happen is at a conference. If it's not through a paper, it's at a conference. Um, but when you're only with one group of people, sometimes you forget to reach out to other professionals within your field that have a different skill set because in many times it should be a multidisciplinary scenario and it should not be just one group of people working on something, in my opinion. But Wildlife Disease Association is veterinarians, veterinary pathologists, biologists, researchers in every different sector and from the state level to the academic level. So that's a really good conference. If you want to go more in the conservation realm, like the zoo realm, the American Association of Zoo Veterinarians is also a very good one. It's primarily veterinarians, but it's a very good conference. They have a pathology conference every year that I would attend. And Wildlife Disease Association also has a pathology workshop. Every year they host it as well. So it really draws in that crowd. So I find if you're in the wildlife and zoo sector, at least stateside, Wildlife Disease Association, although that does go international, I should say, and the American Association of Zoo Vets is a good one on the state side. There's also the European version, the EAZW, I believe, the European Association of Zoo and Wildlife. They have their conference coming up actually, not, and they'll do a joint conference with the AAZV, which will be next year in Munich, that I'm hoping to attend, and see some of my European colleagues because I have a lot of colleagues over the last couple of years. So for those to be beginning, Wildlife Disease Association, if you want to do more free-ranging wildlife is a good one, but if you want to go the zoo realm, American Association of Zoo Vets as well as the European associations are good ones.
Do you have any advice for somebody applying for research funding?
Oh man, I might be the worst person to ask for a research application just because I'm a very much in the because I'm a pathologist and I don't have a PhD, my research has been almost opportunistic. The cases I've been involved have been cases of my own and it's been a lot of collaborative efforts. I need to take a grant writing course basically. So unfortunately with research it's going to be a be true to yourself and what questions you want to answer and finding a good uh, principal investigator who will really support you in those endeavors. Um, yeah, and I find that also, I think a lot of people underestimate the power of there's not one straight line to do something. There's not one line to do something. Everyone thinks there's one way to do something, and it's not always a straight line. Um, and will also say that for those who opt to go to the veterinary school route, you do not need to go to vet school right away to figure out what you want to do. You can get involved with research before you decide you want to go to veterinary school. You can opt to go into research after veterinary school. There's so many different paths. Find the path that you think you are most suited for at the level you are at, and if you really have passion for it, and then keep looking for those opportunities to keep moving. So I find when it comes to when you apply to anything, apply to it with passion and make sure it's something you want to do, or ask yourself what you want to gain from it. Because even if it's not a species you necessarily want to work with, if you think about the skills you will learn from that position, will that help you in your long-term goals? I think a lot of people also underestimate that too. They go for the animal aspect of a project instead of the skills and the questions being answered and how they can be applied for later. One of my first wildlife pathology mentors did her PhD on Ebola and primates. She has not touched primates since, but she took those skills and utilizes them for disease monitoring in her day-to-day world, where she's working mainly with whales and raccoons and foxes and all those things. So do not get um do not stop yourself because you think that you're not going to be interested in it because of just the animal. Think about the skills you'll learn from it.
Are there any emerging technologies that lend themselves to wildlife veterinary pathology?
In terms of wildlife pathology, I think the just access to disease surveillance has really upped its game. The ability for because it used to just be PCR when it comes to diagnosing, especially whether it's a virus or a fungus or a bacteria. But PCRs frequently just only detect one thing, so the resources can be very minimal if you run it and it's negative. But now we have next generation sequencing to really identify specifics. That's really up the game for cultures and PCRs. We have new techniques for under the microscope to really even identify presence where virus is, because it used to just be immunohistochemistry, or you do the PCR, but now we have those staining techniques to really highlight these infectious agents and where they reside in tissues, which can help us better research for better testing methods when we do go on to identify things in other animals. So the and that keeps changing too with what's available because I think it's called in situ hybridization. And it's very fancy. It's also very expensive, unfortunately. But it's really good at highlighting viral particles or where bacteria is specifically in cells when you can't necessarily see them under the microscope with your naked eye and with other special stains. Because there's something, viruses you can't really see. You need those techniques, and it's really helpful, especially in this day and age where we have things like highly pathogenic avian influenza showing up in different animals and in different tissues and in different presentations. We're like, where is this virus going? And what cell type is in that region and why is it going there? Like when they start to see bird flu in dairy cattle, they're like, how is it showing up in the mammary gland? What is happening? And it's with those techniques that we're able to identify it. So I think that those are the emerging things, and there's probably going to be a new thing next week that I don't even know about.
A question now from Erin. And what is the strangest or most unexpected thing you have ever found during an examination?
So actually, the black bears I mentioned earlier, I think to date is my most surprising thing. And that wasn't found on the initial autopsy. That was found under the microscope. I think that was probably one of the most surprising things because that condition, GM1 gangliosidosis, it affects the brain, but the brain looks normal when you're just looking at it as an organ. It's not until you get under the microscope and you see all those brain cells, the neurons are swollen 10 times the size of what they're supposed to be. And when you are working with bears and they act like neurologic, the first things you think about are rabies and canine distemper virus. And we knew it was negative for rabies. There's also a herpes virus that also affects them, but it's not very well described as of right now. Um, but I think to date, that's probably one of the most surprising things is what is that condition, and that will probably be my first author paper in my career. So
Another question from Erin. What diseases in wildlife pose the biggest risk to humans or livestock right now?
mentioned one of them, highly pathogenic avian influenza. That one has now reached unprecedented levels. We still haven't gotten to the level where we have to worry about mass mortality in humans. However, it's a disease we don't want to mess with. It's in the last since 2022, it has expanded well beyond its normal borders of affecting many more mammal species, to the point where any animal that's submitted through the center now is not just every bird, but every mammal is swabbed to make sure they don't have it. So that's one of the biggest ones right now because it's affect and especially with the aspect of now affecting dairy cattle. We haven't really seen that strain since then, but it's the fact that there's even a potential is already a little terrifying. So that's one of the biggest ones. Honestly, in the advent of the anti-vaccine movement also hitting veterinary medicine, rabies honestly is starting to become a bigger issue. People underestimate how easy it can be to acquire rabies because they haven't seen it in a domestic animal. And we live in a very developed country where people don't realize that the rest of the world that doesn't have strict vaccine mandates, it's the feral domestic dogs that carry rabies, not wildlife. Everyone thinks it's just wildlife here, and it can, but they forget like a bat comes into your house and it can easily bite your indoor cat. I have two indoor cats who are vaccinated for a reason. So I think rabies is a big one. I think people underestimate how easily it can come back. That vaccine mandate, the fact that it's very preventable is also what makes it sad. So those, as well as any vector-borne diseases. So we are in the advent of climate change, we are now seeing many more mosquitoes and many more ticks are surviving through winters and spreading several diseases. And mind you, I'm very America centric, so I apologize, but I dealt with a great deal of West Nile virus. I'm also from New England, and that part of New England also has Eastern equine encephalitis, which is also both those are transmitted by mosquitoes. Mammals, including us humans, are dead-end hosts, and if you are very unlucky, you can have very severe neurologic disease, and you can die from it. And I think someone did die from Eastern equine encephalitis after I left Yukon. Um, and so any vector-borne diseases and the tick-borne diseases are also on the rise, and that's for on the domestic side and for humans. So these are the ones I'm most worried about. And again, this is the wildlife domestic human interface that's occurring with all those diseases because it's all related to encroachment. And there are ways we can mitigate it, but unfortunately, we need the research to mitigate it.
Natalie, is there anything you'd like to add?
Uh, in terms of, we kind of broached on this at the beginning, but if you really want a career in wildlife medicine, do not let someone discourage you into going into it because there's, quote, no jobs. And I will also say this to anyone who wants to go into veterinary medicine, do not let someone, do not, and this is something I hate when my colleagues do it, do not let someone tell you to not go to veterinary school because you'll hate it. If you really want to go into it, you will find the avenues. Feel free to get creative. And again, there is no one direction, there is no straight line. I was lucky to get in right away for both vet school and residency. That's not the standard. And I tell people this all the time. Go with what you love, have your support system. And and mind you, everyone's resource availability is very different. Feel free to get creative in the manner that you wish to get involved in that sector. If it's not a full career as a wildlife veterinarian, be a small animal vet that does pro bono work for a wildlife clinic. Or if you don't want to do it fully into zoo medicine, make sure you specialize in something where they'll invite you to the zoo to do as a specialist. The amount of times I saw someone get called in that was a cardiologist or a dentist, I have a lion tooth in my collection because of a vet dentist that had to yank out one of the teeth from our lions because he was a dummy and broke it. Um, and me as a wildlife pathologist, yes, I want to have a career as a wildlife pathologist solely, but I know that those jobs are still limited and people hold on to those jobs for a long time. So when I look for jobs, I look for a position that has wildlife at their lab, and I advertise myself as someone who can help potentially bring in more because I'm willing to tackle those cases, I'm willing to do outreach. And my final thing is you cannot run away from working with people by working with animals. If you want to avoid people, you cannot, especially if you go into veterinary medicine. Uh, if you are going to vet med, because you hate people but love animals, please pick a different career. You have to deal with them all the time. But otherwise, find what you love. You will find a way to do it if you truly love it and be happy with your life.
Natalie, you are a fellow with the National Wildlife Health Center of the United States Geological Survey and the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Veterinary Medicine. Thank you so much for being on the Practical Animal channel, Dr. Natalie Tocco.
Thank you for inviting me. This was fun.